Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's program, Central America and the Trade Facilitation Agreement, an AAFA member-only webinar. My name is Steve Lamar, and I'm the Executive Vice President of the American Apparel and Footwear Association. I will be your moderator for today. Before we begin today's program, let's review a few technical issues. If you are having audio challenges, please dial in using your telephone. The number is located in the audio section of the control panel on your screen. If you are experiencing technical difficulties, please contact GoToWebinar support at 1-800-263-6317. That's 1-800-263-6317. All participants will be muted during today's program. If you have a question, please type it in the question box in the control panel on your screen. We will address as many questions as possible, and any unanswered questions will be addressed by email after the webinar. Before we begin, let me give you some updated information about the AAFA. The American Apparel and Footwear Association is the national trade association representing clothes, shoes, and other sewn products companies and their suppliers, which compete in the global marketplace. Representing more than 1,000 world-famous name brands, AAFA is the trusted public policy and political voice of the apparel and footwear industry, its management and shareholders, its 4 million U.S. workers, and its contribution of more than $360 billion in annual U.S. retail sales. AAFA provides exclusive expertise in supply chain management, trade policy, and brand protection to help our members navigate the complex regulatory environment and lower costs. Members gain unparalleled access to information and exclusive insights on regulation and policy, and premier opportunities for networking and collaboration. AAFA is an advocate providing a platform for policy development and building consensus on industry issues. Education, training, and information, such as today's webinar, supports the demand for real-time tools. We have a great program planned, so let's get started by introducing today's speaker, Luis Barrueto. Luis is the academic coordinator at the Center of Studies on Economic Integration of the Secretariat for Central American Economic Integration, or SIECA. In this role, he contributes to research and training activities to support Central America's economic integration and secure the region's transformation through trade. He trained as a journalist in Guatemala's Francisco Marroquin University, UFM. He later obtained an MA in Journalism, Media, and Globalization with emphasis on business and finance journalism from Aarhus University in Denmark and City University in London in the United Kingdom. Today's webinar will share what's being done to make sure that TFA, the Trade Facilitation Agreement, is implemented fully and regionally so that Central America can reach its full potential. A PDF copy of today's presentation is available for download in the handout section of your control panel. It will also be emailed to you after the program. And with that, Luis, please begin.
All right. Thanks, everyone who's already listening to this presentation. I am speaking on behalf of SIECA today, but I just want to point out that this series of initiatives in trade facilitation policies are really a team effort. There's a series of experts on customs, on migration, and other topics that, as you know, are an integral part of trade policies today. So I just want to point that out as we move forward. I'm going to be talking about a series of initiatives in trade facilitation. To get acquainted with what I'm going to be covering, first of all, I'm going to get into the Central American Trade Facilitation Strategy, which is a program that we started in 2014. Then we're going to discuss some of the implications of the Trade Facilitation Agreement for the region. And lastly, we're going to discuss the customs union that Guatemala and Honduras launched last June, which is the most recent one. Maybe it's a Trade Facilitation Plus strategy, but it has implications that go in tandem with the previous two initiatives. So as Steve said, please send your questions and your input. We're going to be discussing that at the end of the session. And let's get started. So the first initiative that I'm going to be discussing is the Central American Trade Facilitation Strategy, which, as you see here, has a longer name because it's focused in competitiveness and raising basically the performance of the region in this area. And this is done so by implementing a coordinated border management system in Central America. What started off this facilitation strategy is the discovery and the understanding that the current situation in Central America is that while we have a very profound integration process and we have a free trade zone already in place in the region, with almost 98 of tariffs having been eliminated for exports and imports between countries in Central America, what the region is lacking is really a necessary equipment and infrastructure, adequate information systems and control procedures, and a degree of transparency in customs administration, which contribute to the raising of costs and time that it takes for goods to move across countries in the region. Some of the indicators we can see on screen here is that basically the average speed of goods in circulation in Central America is as low as 17 kilometers per hour. It takes 14 days to make an import, 13 days to make an export, and this raises costs of goods by an average of 12%, but this also taking account in the sense that it varies between one country and the next. In particular, this is a necessary understanding from which the region has to start in its current policies, because even though we have a quite considerable degree of trade openness and also a considerable degree of intra-regional trade, this is what's having the most impact in the commercial operations in the region. So in consideration of this, the presidents of Central America, who meet regularly every semester to discuss some of the regional initiatives and policies, decided to instruct their ministers, their Council of Ministers of Economic Integration, which is basically formed by the trade and economic ministers in the region, to adopt and implement a trade facilitation strategy, which is emphasizing the coordinated border management paradigm, this also in coordination with other sectoral councils and competent authorities. This is a mandate, a clear mandate, as we can see here, that stemmed from the summit of presidents that took place in Punta Cana in the Dominican Republic in 2014. So if we set ourselves in the timeline, this predated the entry into force of the trade facilitation agreement, but it came to be a priority basically because the negotiations at the heart of the World Trade Organizations were already emphasizing the need for trade facilitation, and the trade facilitation agreement had already been devised. It was mostly undergoing the process of successful approval and then implementation after member states ratified it. But this was part of our realization that that WTO agreement was insufficient or was not fully adapted to the needs of the region. So this is basically an initiative to complement the measures from TFA, adapt them to our context, and create other basically priorities for us to move forward faster in the trade facilitation initiatives that we have ongoing in the region. Why do we emphasize coordinated border management in it? Basically because we realized that one of the key issues in Central America was the lack of coordination between public sector agencies, not only between one country and the next, but also within a specific country, for example, between customs agencies or migration agencies and every actor involved in the control processes in frontiers and in commerce related operations. So CBM is basically aiming to promote the coordination between these stakeholders and also with the private sector to improve procedures for everything related to tax collection, control and security in points of entry, and facilitating the transit of goods and people, basically in framework of control and efficiency in the use of resources. This is also adapting some of the best practices worldwide from countries that have effectively raised their standards in trade facilitation procedures. So we're not inventing any sort of standard here. We're just basically adapting it to the context of our region and the very lack of coordination between our public sector, and especially involving the private sector as they are enabling the public sector to get acquainted with what the crucial priorities are. So this is the selected model for the strategy. As we can see here from the presidential mandate in Punta Cana in June 2014, when the president instructed the Council of Ministers to adopt the strategy, we carried on a process to validate the, well, first to elaborate and then to validate the strategy with the private sector. This took place in a series of activities and workshops over the end of 2014 and the beginning of 2015, where we had several rounds of negotiation with border authorities and then with the high-end section of authorities from each country in COMIECO, the Council of Ministers. After which, we also carried on a validation strategy with the private sector. Any of those interested in giving their feedback or their insights into what the key priorities are in trade facilitation's areas should know that actually the design of the strategy was essential in reviving the private sector institutions that are the key consulting body for the integration process in Central America. This is called the Comité Consultivo de Integración Económica, or the Consulting Committee of Economic Integration, which is basically a regional organization that takes into account the insights and the offerings of each of the private sector institutions in the region, part of which is the textile sector. And they validated this strategy and also made some changes that were later adopted in the final text, which was approved in October 2015. Part of it involves dealing with the model of coordinated border management in Central America, as I said before. But through this validation process, the region came up with 5 short-term measures that were presented by the private sector as one of the key priorities in reducing the costs of the circulation of goods in Central America. So we not only selected sort of the main key things that we needed to do, but we also selected what the things we had to prioritize early on so we could move forward, and also tried to devise some of the monitoring and evaluation indicators and coordination schemes to ensure that the implementation was done effectively. To get into more detail about what this entails, we have a series of measures that you can see on the right side of your screen, basically adopting international standards in information interoperability, risk management, creating some specific measures for economic operators considered reliable in the region, quarantine control, integrating and harmonizing procedures and control between countries, improving infrastructure and equipment in border posts, and basically taking care of the surrounding community and security of the region surrounding border controls. Besides these 8 pillars, what we also considered were 3 transversal pillars of the strategy, which is what you can see on your left side of the screen, which is basically, and starting from the bottom, is strengthening the national trade facilitation committees, which is sort of side by side with one of the key measures of the trade facilitation agreement, which basically creates these committees, but in the sense that the strategy here picks that up and also tries to coordinate their work, not only at the national level and the implementation of their national commitments to the TFA, but also to coordinate what we are doing at the regional level to ensure that they can show progress in a more rapid fashion. The other key pillar is the diagnosis and implementations of key reforms that pairs of countries and pairs of borders need to take into account. So there's considerable heterogeneity in what each of the countries in Central America has to do to get to that new level of standards that the trade facilitation policy set in place. So we're also working with each of these countries and each of these border agencies to ensure that they can have the resources and the know-how to get to that level as soon as possible. And one of the key ways to do that is by implementing what we call the Central American Commerce Digital Platform, into which I will get into more detail real soon. But first, I want to take a look at the short-term measures devised in the strategy. These are the following. Basically, implementing a region-wide implementation of these measures. Some of them have been implemented in a particular country before, but the point in implementing this at the regional level is to ensure that everyone can share best practices already implemented and ensure that they can operate at the regional level. So we have first the anticipatory transmission of documents for cargo, basically to eliminate additional procedures in border crossings and accelerate the times that it takes to perform these procedures. Basically implement the single conduction of migration controls. Now, some of the countries conduct their controls at the country of departure and at the country of arrival, but this proposes to single that out and accelerate the clearance of drivers in particular to ensure that goods move faster through the region. The third short-term measure is create an electronic system for the emission and transmission of phyto and sanitary certificates. Sanitary controls are one of the key obstacles in the region, but basically accelerating this through the implementation of IT solutions could offer a great benefit to Central America. To take a closer look about border crossing times and identify where the bottlenecks are, at present, we are also proposing to implement a registry of cargo units with RFID devices, basically to assess what necessities there are to adapt the infrastructure, the physical infrastructure, both in the roads and in border crossings, to adapt these and ensure that cargo can move faster. And an additional security measure is to installate cameras in border crossings to increase transparency in border management and basically reduce the scope for human discretionality in applying different procedures and reduce the problem of corruption in the borders. These are the 5 short-term measures into which we're currently working. Basically, SIECA is assisting countries to adapt their systems and their borders to implement these in short term. We're doing so with support from the IADB, and some of the countries have already implemented some of these, so the progress is mixed, but it promises to be done in quite short time and then give way to faster implementation of the TFA as well. We also propose several coordination schemes here because, as I said before, one of the key obstacles in the region is the lack of coordination between public actors and also between the public and the private sector. So at the regional level, we have national coordination between border control agencies and the national trade facilitation committees, which are overseeing the whole implementation of this process. At the binational level, there is interinstitutional coordination as well to establish the scope and schedule the implementation of reforms. And at the regional level, there is coordination between the trade facilitation committees with the trade facilitation group that takes a distinct role in speaking with the councils of ministers related to trade and infrastructure. And because all of these initiatives require a considerable amount of resources as well, there is a coordination scheme with donors, which SIECA takes care of implementing. So we have annual coordination meetings to update the inventory of reforms done, the projects, their timeframes, and what advances we've made, and also to identify existing gaps in financing and support for said projects. The key issue here is particularly the benefits that implementing this strategy will offer. And there's a considerable benefit to everyone involved, in particular to governments, the private sector, and citizens as well. And governments can rely on a more effective and efficient use of their resources, have a positive impact in revenues, lower the amount of smuggling and filtration because it reduces corruption, as I said, but also because it makes trade faster, work faster, and grow at a faster pace. Compliance is facilitated, so merchants will also comply at a higher level. There's going to be increased security in crossings and surroundings, and also there's going to be an improvement to transparency. In the private sector, which is probably what we're most interested in, there's going to be a reduction of costs caused by the delays and informal payments that we know takes into account a lot of time and a lot of cost for private sector actors in the region. There's going to be a streamlining of border procedures, so there's going to be an increased facility to comply. There's going to be faster attention to their needs. There's going to be an application of rules with more consistency and predictability. And there's going to be also an increased effectiveness and efficiency in the use of resources, an increase in transparency, improved security as well. And for citizens, this is all going to rebound in reduction in prices, access to increased arrays of products, and also increasing job opportunities and private investment. In particular, one of the key issues to take into account here is that the implementation of the strategy by itself, not taking into account the TFA or the customs union impact, the time to process cargo is going to go down from between 80 and 85%, particularly in the side of imports. But it's also going to affect what the times it takes to move goods in transit and empty vessels as well. And also the time to process people, and this goes for particularly bus drivers and transport companies in the region, is there's going to be a reduction in 55% in the amount of time it takes to process people in borders. Part of the essential aspects of the strategy is, as I said before, the Central American Digital Trade Platform. This is basically an IT solution to help speed up the trade facilitation strategy implementation, basically by creating a platform to facilitate the information exchange between the authorities involved in foreign trade control procedures, not only customs, but also migration, sanitary control, security as well. And it comes in 3 phases, into which we are already working to a full degree in the first one. The first phase is the interoperability platform, which basically enables information exchange between authorities. At present, the informational systems that each of these authorities has works in a different way, and they are not usually connected. This is going to enable basically a translation device for them to transmit information easily between the systems of one customs department to the other country's customs agency, and between also the other actors involved in these processes. Then we have two additional phases, which involve a degradation of a mediator of digital services, which might optimize and harmonize the trade operations in the region, basically enabling the compatibilization of these procedures and their informational platforms. And then a third phase will improve this step and create a manager of digital services, which will include new processes, new functions, and include fully international standards. And this will enable creating basically a single window for region-wide operations related to trade in Central America. Where we are right now is in the phase 1, which has a general progress of 78%. And basically, there's been already part of the implementation completed. Interoperability bus to transmit data between one and the other agency has already been completed. There's the development of alternate communication mechanisms in customs agencies that's been completed as well. And we're basically working in optimizing these communication mechanisms at present and applying a system to transmit the Single Central American Declaration, which is called DUCA in Spanish, which will have its own portal and application, and that's also completed to an 87% of progress, which results in almost 80% of progress in this area. Basically, this is the key initiative that we're working on within the trade facilitation strategy, and here at SIECA, we believe that it's going to deliver some of the key results in facilitating trade in the region and reducing those high costs and high amounts of time that it takes to move goods in the region. Next, I want to move to the Trade Facilitation Agreement of the WTO, as this is something that most of you must be acquainted with already. I just want to emphasize how this will come into application within the regional schemes. So, as you know, the Trade Facilitation Agreement has several dispositions related to publication and availability of information, advanced rulings, procedures for appeal or review, other measures to enhance impartiality, transparency, and non-discrimination, disciplines on fees and charges imposed or in connection with importation and exportation penalties. But here we're going to be focusing on a few of these that have a direct impact into our regional actions to improve trade facilitation. Getting into closer detail, we're going to be focusing, first of all, in the release and clearance of goods. This article in the TFA contemplates pre-arrival processing, electronic payment, risk management, the implementation of RFID devices to adequately assess average release times, trade facilitation measures for authorized operators. All of these are part of the either short-term measures, as in the case of RFID devices and pre-arrival processing, but also in the longer-term measures contemplated in the Central American strategy, such as risk management, which is pretty much a transversal pillar of the strategy, and electronic payment, which is also one of the future measures that we'll be implementing. Two of the other key areas are in Article 8 and Article 12 in the TFA, which basically have to do with border agency cooperation and customs cooperation, which at the Central American level, we created mechanisms to ensure implementation is done by pairs of countries and pairs of customs. And by integrating control procedures, not only in the technological sphere through the digital platform, but also starting the process to harmonize these processes. We have around 3 rounds of negotiations every semester to ensure that the teams in each of the areas involved, customs, migration, sanity, public health, and some of the other key areas such as tariffs, basically negotiate the technical detail of how these harmonization process is going to work towards the implementation of the strategy and towards the implementation of the customs union at the Central American level. The other part of the TFA, which contemplates a measure that is reflected at the Central American level as well and is going to be implemented at an additional level, is the Section 3 on committees, which basically requires countries to establish a permanent committee on trade facilitation at the WTO, but also to have a national committee to facilitate the domestic coordination and implementation of the provisions of the agreement. Besides being charged with the implementation of the TFA, these very same national committees are also working hand in hand with the Regional Trade Facilitation Group, which the Central American strategy creates, and which will assist the countries in implementing some of these measures, but also it seeks to coordinate the implementation of both the TFA and the strategy, as they have similar provisions to a different extent and scope, but also to coordinate the implementation of both these initiatives with the mandates of the Ministers of Trade. So there's also a clear articulation not only of the technical teams at the nation level, but also with high-level officials which can work directly with them to address some of the crucial blockades or bottlenecks that they might find along the way. The regional group also follows up on other regional agreements and initiatives related to trade facilitation. The digital platform, first of all, but also adapting other trade-related regulations to TFA dispositions. And here at SIECA, we're also working and evaluating some proposals to adapt the Central American Customs Code, CAUCA, and its rulebook, the RECAUCA, as we call it, so it can reflect some of the newer dispositions that the TFA contemplates and eliminate some of the older dispositions that have not been adapted to our new reality, including issues of intellectual property, for example, or digital commerce in particular. And lastly, I want to get into detail about the Guatemala-Honduras Customs Union, because even though this enables free circulation of goods, it's also a trade facilitation plus strategy here in Central America, as contemplated by the very instruments of regional integration. For quite a long time, before I get into the background and timeline here, for a long time, the Customs Union has been one of the key goals of the regional integration process. Of course, this stalled and was basically stopped for a series of years due to a variety of reasons. First, the economic crises of the 80s, then the relaunch of the process after the civil wars in the region, and then since 2007, we've been working on the Customs Union at the Central American level under the framework of general roadmap to get there. That general roadmap establishes the goal of 2024 for the final completion of the Customs Union at the Central American level. And that's what we've been working on as starters through the trade facilitation strategies that I commented before. Despite this, there is a clause in the legal instruments of the regional integration process, specifically the Protocol of Guatemala from 1993, that enables two countries to move faster in the consolidation of this customs union. So that's what Guatemala proposed to Honduras during a presidential visit in December 2014, shortly after the presidents had given the mandate to implement the trade facilitation strategy. So during this visit, both presidents announced that they're going to consolidate a customs union between themselves and basically send the signal that this is going to move forward at the bilateral level. In February of 2015, they established a general framework for how they were going to move forward. Basically, they adopt the same mechanisms that the Central American Customs Union had constructed by the time, and create a model for implementation. Then in April, they subscribed the habilitating protocol of the Customs Union between Guatemala and Honduras, which creates the mechanisms to implement it. It creates a ministerial instance that is empowered with coming up with solutions to everything related to the construction of the customs union. So it not only has to do with trade policies, but also all the bottlenecks that came starting in that month and onwards until last June, regarding public health issues, security issues, internal revenues issues as well. So these ministerial instances had basically complete powers to implement the customs union, and that's why they decided to adopt it in this way. After the subscription of this protocol, there was a process of ratification by both Congresses, which took place in the end of 2015 in the case of Guatemala and in the beginning of 2016 in Honduras. And it finally came into force after this approved protocol was deposited at the Secretary General of the integration system. Following that, there were 19 technical meetings between this time and the final implementation to ensure that all of these issues, the list of products that were included and the list that were left out, how the customs were going to be adapted, what the specific measures were, that they were decided in these technical meetings, and the launch was finally done in June 2016. On June 26th of 2016, I'm sorry. This basically joins the scheme of regional integration that we have in the regional level, where basically the customs union is perceived as an improvement over the free trade zone already existing in Central America, where there is a common external tariff, there's a joint mechanism for tax collection, there is a common trade policy, and basically it operates as a single customs territory. What legal base this has comes from a variety of instruments, mostly from the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade at the WTO, and then on some of the regional legal instruments, such as the General Treaty of Economic Integration, the Protocol of Guatemala to that treaty. There is a general framework for Central American Customs Union, which is what I mentioned before, and there is a Guatemala and Honduras agreement to compatibilize and harmonize their internal taxes to ensure that some of the key doubts about how the customs union was going to move forward was taken care of, which was basically this tax collection consideration. And then all of those gave way to the habilitating protocol, which I mentioned before, and that was essentially what created the customs union creation mechanisms. So besides this, the protocol creates the institutions of the customs union, the ministerial instance, as I said, and how the technical teams were going to work on the solutions to the implementation. It basically creates the regime of free circulation of goods between both countries. It regulates some exceptions to the free circulation, which I'll get into in a few minutes. Enables the free transit of people, not only of drivers and transport companies, but also just generally anyone who wants to move from Guatemala to Honduras. It also creates a provision to enable third parties to join in the future, which is going to be important as we move forward. It created a structural fund to develop the customs union with an initial donation or report from each of the member countries of $5 million, but then this was also the fund that administrated some of the cooperation and donors funds that enabled the implementation of the customs union. It created the role of border post coordinator. It regulated the workings of the private sector consultation body, which is the consultative committee of the customs union. And then it determined the reach and scope of SIECA's supportive role, which has been one of the key enablers of the coordination between both countries. So how it works. Here we can see some of the new customs in the customs union. Basically, there is a variety of already existing ports and customs posts, but now it creates a distinction between the peripheral customs of the customs union of the single territory, and then three initial integrated control posts. In here, we can see 75% of trade having free circulation, regardless of the origin of the products. There's going to be a 98% tariff harmonization as originally as well, and there's going to be a gradual process of harmonization of sanitary requirements. Before the customs union, what we could see, and this is probably going to make it clearer to the audience, is that there was a free trade of products to a higher extent, with the single exceptions of sugar and coffee. These were all basically regulated by the preferences and regulations of the Central American Common Market. There were slight exceptions, and these were contemplated from the very beginning on Annex A to the General Treaty, which, as I said, included only sugar and coffee as key products exempt from this free trade regime. With the customs union, however, there is not only free trade but also free circulation of goods. So this is also regardless of origin, but there is a common external tariff, as I said before, of 98%. But then there is the coming into force of the habilitating protocol and the tax compatibilization agreement. So this basically entails that a variety of products, about 95% of product categories, and in the terms of bilateral trade, it's about 75% of trade between both countries, can now circulate freely between both states and within the single customs territory. There's going to be a series of exemptions remaining to free circulation, which basically has to do with differential internal taxes, differential sanitary regimes, different tariffs, and different preferential agreements that some of these products may have through FTAs with third parties. And then there remains the single exception to free trade included in the Annex A to the General Treaty, which is sugar and coffee. Here we have the role of the new integrated control posts, which by mutual agreement are located in Honduras, and where authorities from both countries operate jointly to ensure that these exempted goods can go through the appropriate control procedures, and the goods with free circulation can go through a fast lane that enables their free circulation. So in this post, there's going to be a double-sided strategy where there is a trade facilitation center where goods with free circulation basically declare their FIDUCA, which is the single invoice and declaration for these products. And then there is they don't pay their customs declaration to us, the general customs declaration here, but only in peripheral customs. Once they get into the territory, they don't have to declare it again. And then there is another side of this that involves the integrated control posts, which takes care of all goods exempt from free circulation. There's a variety of declarations that apply here, depending on the type of product and the origin and the free trade agreement it may be under. But just to be clear, free circulation operations will use FIDUCA routinely, so it basically reduces the amount of paperwork that that operators need to go through in these positions, and most of all, it reduces the cost and the time that it involves. Then there's a variety of peripheral customs, which includes air, land, and sea customs. At the beginning, 10 out of the existing 32 will be enabled as entry points to the single customs territory. But as we move into a phase of perfection, of working towards the perfection of the customs union, it's going to be increased as we move forward. Here is a slight depiction of how this will work in practice. So you can see Guatemala and Honduras on the left and right sides of the picture, but then the customs were adapted to reflect the need for a fast lane for the trade facilitation center, where free circulation goods can move faster and with more speed as well, with reduced costs. And then the integrated control center, which will remain taking care of the exempt goods for a while, although we must be clear, and as we move to the next phase of the customs union, we expect the list of exempt products to go down as harmonization between commercial policies of both countries comes into place. This is basically where you can fill out your single invoice and declaration. Guatemala and Honduras have distinct portals, but they've been included in the tax collection agencies in both countries, and then in those websites too, you can follow up a user's manual with instructions to fill the portal and see the list of goods exempt from free circulation. There's a portal that allows you to actually determine if your good, depending on your product category and your product codes, whether they are exempt or not from free circulation, or whether they will be, and then you get an estimate of how that will work out. This is sort of the format for the single invoice and declaration. And just to be clear, we're now in an implementation phase, which makes it not fully mandatory for goods with free circulation, but we're moving towards that, and we expect to be there by January 1st of next year. This allows for a variety of benefits. Of course, it substitutes a variety of customs procedure for a single one. It enables a digital platform as well that is free for the end user and quite easy to use. It also allows for real-time online transmission and tax payment in advance of arrival to the control center. So it enables a declaration and presentation of the invoice in a few seconds rather than a variety of hours as it did in the past. We can validate the invoice and declaration online, and it involves the time and cost reduction as well. Other benefits include the fully online validation and transmission of FIDUCA. There is a variety of digital controls in place to enable safer transactions and safer preservation of your information. This creation of the single invoice and declaration also involves collaboration and communication between the tax agencies. So it will also have spillover effects for future coordination between both of the agencies involved, SAT and SAR, as they are known. It also allows for a prompt control of exempted goods because it creates a single distinction between the declarations that they both need to use, and it involves a variety of contingencies and safety controls for both countries. Basically, these involve not only electronic controls, implementing some of the worldwide best practices in this sense, but also it allowed for the information exchange between both agencies to ensure that they have the right information to perform these controls. And there is a variety of operations as well physically, only in public ways and roads to begin with, but also physical inspection in warehouses, for example. There's a variety of instructives for the staff working in the integrated control posts, and it's going to be done in coordination with the high-level group on security, which is called GANSEC, and which already operates in coordination of other security initiatives in Central America. There is also a question of free movement of people, and the Customs Union also allowed for some migration measures, which I sum up here. Drivers can pre-check now, so their controls, the control mechanisms in migration terms are also faster. There is a single control in the country of departure as well, which is also part of the initiatives that we proposed at the regional level, as I mentioned before. There is free movement of people, and all flights between Guatemala and Honduras are now considered local flights, so they have different procedures in airports to enable people to move faster and more efficiently. Let's get into the exceptions to the free circulation, as some of you might be interested in. The habilitating protocol contemplates some of the following exceptions, which basically are those goods included in Part 2 of the Central American Import Tariff, that is those in the Annex A. There are goods subject to contingents as part of FTAs that one country may have and not the other one. I'll get into detail about what those are. There are some of the goods that are subject to safeguard clauses, some goods that have differentiated sanitary and phyto regimes, or may have substantially different fiscal regimes. And there are other special cases which might be deemed by the ministerial instance. Here are some of the detail or the product categories that may be exempt according to each of those categories. So for example, those that are excluded by for commercial reasons include swine and poultry, meats, dairy eggs, potatoes, onion, corn flour, maize meal, vegetable oils, sausages and similar products, food preparations, especially those with phyto and sanitary regimes. It may involve a variety, a series of efforts to consolidate the procedures that are applied, and then they might move to the goods with free circulation. There are those in the Annex A which also don't have free trade at the moment, which are basically coffee and sugarcane. There's other other goods exempt for non-commercial reasons, such as weapons and munitions, radioactive elements, chemical products, and some of the flora and fauna protected by CITES, the Convention on Unprotected Species. There are those that are exempt because of existing differences in tariff regimes due to trade agreements, and these involve basically those that are adopted. In the list, there's a partial scope trade agreement with Belize, the Central America-Chile FTA, the Canada and Honduras FTA, Colombia and Central America's Northern Triangle. There are those in this list which may have different tables to reduce the tariffs. So as long as they move forward, they might move as well to the lists of goods with free circulation. And then there are those with differences in rules of origin in the FTAs, which include in the Central America-Mexico FTA, the armored vehicle and wheat flour categories. Honduras and Canada FTA, there's perfumes and toilet waters, preparation for manicures and pedicures. And with the FTA with Taiwan, there's popcorn, brand flour, toys, and vehicle parts. And with the EU, and through the association agreement, there's a list that includes petrol oils, medicinal products for veterinary use, and non-metallized printed plastic sheets. So it's a small list of products, and as we move forward, we expect that it goes down, and most of trade is going to be conducted under the free circulation regime. There's a variety of expected benefits here as well. So the reduction in logistic costs, and not only in amounts of time, which at present are those that you find on the left side of the screen, but also a reduction between 21 and 25% in these costs based on the value of trade. There's going to be an economic impact as well that we've estimated with the help of the World Bank and the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, which is an improvement in the GDP of Guatemala between 0.2 and 0.4%, and in Honduras between 0.3 and 0.7, an increase in exports between 0.4 and 1.5, or 0.8 and 2.2 in Honduras, and an increase in tax revenue in both countries as well as a result of increased trade between both countries. As we move forward, you might be interested in knowing what will happen next. So we are working on standardizing working hours in integrated control posts, so we can ensure 24/7 transit of and tourism as well. The transition towards full implementation of FIDUCA is going to be completed by December this year. Then we are working on a proposal of a code of sanctions related to the implementation of the customs union. It's going to be notified to the WTO and other trade partners as well to ensure they can get acquainted with how it works and what the exact provisions are. Guatemala and Honduras are going to start doing joint negotiations with Central America and other partners in the future. and there's going to be a full implementation moving forward, and improvement of the actual provisions to ensure that they can get a wider scope and ensure that this works in favor of trade operators in the region. There is going to be a variety of initiatives to improve border security in coordination with other authorities and councils of ministers. And we are expecting for the customs union to grow in membership. So El Salvador has already committed to coming up with a roadmap for its incorporation to the customs union that already exists between Guatemala and Honduras. They're working on it at present, and they're going to present it on December this year. This will create a specific route for their inclusion into the agreement, into the customs union, and it will contemplate basically the adaptations that the other two countries had to go to through to the fully implementation of the customs union, which include infrastructure developments and also IT developments to ensure that FIDUCA works. But they will come up with that by December this year. What this will do to the customs union is basically extend the impact of this basically trade facilitation plus strategy by raising the GDP included in the customs union to 62.5% of the total in Central America. The extension of the customs union will also grow past half of the Central American territory. The population will rise to almost 75%, which is quite considerable, and the three countries bring together almost 70% of total trade in Central America. So this could offer considerable benefits, not only for the member countries, but also in speeding up the regional integration process. Nicaragua, as I said, has also been a close observer of the process. In the high-level meeting that took place between Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador to ensure that they could move forward with incorporating El Salvador, Nicaragua was also present. The president of Nicaragua has also said that he's quite interested in joining next. So this will also raise the benefits of the customs union to a wider array of the population and to a broader base of trade operations in Central America, beyond 76% in that case, and to over 80% of the population. This is how it might look at that point. So the lighter blue customs here are the peripheral projected customs union posts in CA4, and the darker blue ones would be those that facilitate trade between member states in the customs union. So there's already been an exercise of projecting how this will look in practice, and it's basically an issue of how countries can commit to implementing what it takes to join the scheme and fully implement it. So just to sum it up, SIECA is quite committed to working on trade facilitation strategies in the region. As I point out, one of the ways we've done that is by complementing the multilateral agreement, the TFA, which some of you may be more acquainted with in terms of the content and what it entails for countries. But we've also decided to bring that to our context at the regional level with the Central American strategy. And with a quite distinct initiative, the customs union would be the first in the American continent. So it basically opens up a new path to keep facilitating trade operations in Central America and facilitate the movement of goods and also of people in the region. So thanks a lot. Here is my contact. Should you have any further questions after the presentation, but I think we're going to have a few at present.
Luis, thanks, and actually it was a great presentation. I really appreciate it. I learned an awful lot. I'm not sure actually we're going to have time for questions. We're coming right up to the end of the hour, and one of the things we try to commit is to be punctual with that 1 hour time slot, so folks can get back and take their learning back to their day job. But it is great to see your contact information, because I know a couple of folks have contacted me, and they asked how they can follow up with you directly if there's specific ideas or recommendations or things they can point out, you know, problems they've encountered in Central America that they can bring to your attention. So that's good contact information, that they can do that directly. And for those of you on the line, that's something, it's a dialogue that we continue to have, not only with SIECA, but with the Central American governments, and also our friends at SIECA Tech, who also helped organize folks to join this webinar as well. And Karen from SIECA Tech was gracious. She organized a great conversation with some of the folks at SIECA and myself when I was down in Guatemala just a couple of months ago. I do believe we're going to have a chance for a follow-up conversation in Washington in a couple of weeks, Luis, when some of your colleagues are in town, and we're hoping to organize that soon. So we may have some information about that. Those of you on our Central America Task Force and the Government Relations Committee can find out more information there. So with that, why don't we wrap up? You know, just again, thank you, Luis, for providing us with such good insight and valuable information. And, you know, we really enjoyed having you guys present with us on this important topic. As a reminder, for those of you on the webinar, you will get an email with a link to the PDF of today's presentation, and a recording will be made available in the members only section of the AAFA Learning Center. So Luis, thank you again. Muchas gracias. Thanks everyone for attending, and thank you for joining today's webinar. Appreciate it.